Is there such a thing as fake art? F for Fake is a hard movie to review. Really hard movie. For many reasons. The main reason being that I wish I could just drop everything and tell you, go see it immediately. Cause F for Fake is a goddamn masterpiece. Everything I say now is just gonna ruin the movie for you. Track this movie down and watch it now instead of sitting here listening to me blathering about it. I utterly adore this movie. But that's not why it's hard to review. And no, it's not because I'm scared to talk about the movie's director and star, a guy named, Orson Welles. Yes, Orson Welles, noted wine connoisseur.
Ah, the French champagne.
Voice actor.
In the American Far West. This is a lot of shit, you know that.
And children's birthday party magician. Orson Welles. Oh yeah, and he directed the greatest movie ever made or something like that, whatever. This was Welles' last movie. Last movie as director. Last completed movie as director. I want this to be his last movie. Cause otherwise, his actual last movie would be his role as Unicron in Transformers: The Movie, in which he played a planet-sized toy that ate other smaller toys. So, typecasting.
Would you take this away, please, and bring me the steak au poivre? Thanks a lot.
Food for the food god! And that crack about the magic act? Well, he was actually quite proud of his magic hobby. If you couldn't tell by this opening.
A transformation. We've changed your key into a coin.
Good an opening as ever to set the theme of the film, which, if you couldn't guess from the title, is about fakery and fake-outs.
Ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction, this is a film about trickery and fraud, about lies.
This is a sort of a kind of a documentary directed by Welles during his latter screw Hollywood, I'ma go to Europe and fail to make movies there years. And when I say directed by Welles, I of course mean that most of the key footage was shot by this guy, Francois Reichenbach, and the footage he shot was about this guy, Elmire d'Ori.
Who is Elmire?
Elmire was a painter, a very infamous painter of other people's paintings. He was an art forger, you see, living in Ibiza while hiding from French authorities.
And if the lawyers would just let us, we could name you one highly respected museum which boasts of an important collection of post-impressionists, every single one of which was painted by Elmire.
That story was supplemented by footage Welles shot. Footage like this.
Through the week.
That's Orson's girlfriend. And oh boy, does he want us to know that that's his girlfriend.
We're doing it.
Okay, sidebar. This is Oya Kodar. She was, and actually still is, a very talented artist, and the current manager of the Welles estate. She is actually an uncredited co-writer on the film and penned several sequences, including this montage where she openly mocks the male gaze, and almost the entire epilogue. And I feel like Oya Kodar's gotten the short end of the stick in most reviews of this movie, so I don't want to dismiss her as eye candy, and wasn't I talking about an art forger or something? Oh yeah, Elmire. Hungarian, art forger, freeze frame enthusiast.
She saw on the wall, pinned on the wall of drawing. I say, hey, where you got that Picasso?
It was the 70s. Freeze frame endings were everywhere. Ha! Actually, this movie is one of the best edited things I've ever seen. I mean, it just blazes by. Every cut is interesting. Every beat is perfectly timed. It makes you forget how low-grade most of the footage is. And it turns it into this dizzying romp through a hall of mirrors, and I'm losing myself again. I mean, I was on Oya Kodar, and then the editing, and this is about art forgery, right?
Sorry, I've been jumping around like this because that's the way it was.
At the same time Elmire was in Reichenbach's documentary, he was the subject of a biography being written by this man.
Clifford Irving.
By a strange coincidence, Clifford Irving became very famous during the making of this film. So famous that 20 years later, Richard Gere would play him in a movie. Because Clifford Irving was the biographer of one very hard-to-reach man, Howard Hughes.
Hughes denied the existence of Irving.
No, I never saw
Don't believe a word of it, said Irving.
Irving duped the public into thinking that he had scored an exclusive interview with Howard Hughes at his most hard-to-reach urine in jars way of the future phase of his life. And this book he wrote, this piece of biography forgery, became a national bestseller. So Wells found out that he was making a movie about a faker who was writing a book about a faker. Then, Wells has the insight to step back and think about the lies that he is told. He's no stranger to scandal, obviously. We've all heard the stories about how he caused a panic on the East Coast by suggesting that Martians were invading New Jersey. And Wells, heard those stories too. And even before that, he admits that his first gig in the arts was gotten by lying his ass off.
Oh, I guess I could have found myself an honest job as a dishwasher or something, but no, I took the easy way. I went on the stage. I'd never been on the stage, but I told them in Dublin I was a famous star from New York and somehow got them to believe me. That's how I started. Began at the top and have been working my way down ever since.
So if you're keeping track, F for Fake is a fake documentary about a fake artist being described by a fake writer and framed by a self-admitted fake superstar genius person. It's tough to know where to start on this one, but that's not really why it's hard to review. Now, the reason this is a hard movie to review is because I'm an expert. That's not like an ego thing. I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying that functionally, by sitting down in front of a camera and talking to you about stuff that I want to talk about, I am basically taking on the role of expert. And if this movie has anything close to a villain, to an antagonist, it's the expert.
That's a fact.
What's new are the
experts.
The so-called experts,
experts are the new oracles.
who are greatly pretentious,
They speak to us with the absolute authority of the computer.
pretend to know something what they only know very superficially.
And we bow down before them. They're God's own gift to the faker.
So before we go on, I want to throw off any airs of expertise that I might be putting on. My undergrad work was in theater, not in film. My grad work was in film, but more in film production than film theory. I do have some dramaturgy training, but that's, again, theater. It's not film, per se. I've never been published by anyone other than myself. I haven't written for any major or minor, film critic magazine or website or anything like that. Basically, everything that I'm saying right now was the opinion of a film fan who just kind of taught himself film theory, because I am legitimately fascinated by it, because I do think it's important to study film critically and to look at film critically and look at all mediums critically. But again, I don't have the authority bestowed upon me to be like a film critic, if one can even have that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm basically a film fan. Like most critics, really, I am a film fan first. I know that in the grand scheme of things, there are way, way more in-depth and insightful and probably more useful to you as a viewer film critics out on the internet right now. And I could easily give you a list of 10 that I would rather you watch than watch me. Because, again, I am just a film fan. And, if you have a problem with that, and yeah, that's a very legitimate problem to have. I don't blame you for being worried about that. By all means, turn off this video and never watch me again. I won't judge you. Still here? Good. Let's continue. Now that we've unmasked everyone in this vast conspiracy, let's do what any good conspiracy theorist does and follow the money. Because, after all, that's what art is for. At least the way our society treats it. Let's get real here. Art is not this spiritual ascendance into a heaven of pretension that makes you shout, "Ah!" No. Art is a thing. Art is a thing that exists for you to contemplate. And it takes a vast network of people, buyers, dealers, exhibitors, producers, and yes, fans, to all declare that a certain object is worth contemplation. We call this object art. Such an object is then commodified, sold to people who agree that this object is worth contemplating. People make entire careers out of writing about these objects of contemplation, out of critiquing these objects of contemplation, out of curating these objects of contemplation. It's a vast network that relies and thrives on the notion that art is an object to be contemplated. And yes, as a person who talks about art, I am part of that network. And guess what else? So are you. By sitting there watching me talk about this object that I want to contemplate, you are part of that network. Not romantic, I know. But that's really how the art business works, just like any other market system. And I get the feeling that F for Fake doesn't like that notion. Hell, I don't like that notion. Wells' ultimate thesis might be that it's only because we view art as a thing to be bought and sold, only because we have art experts who can place a price on commodities, that art forgery is a business. Only because we have laws do we have lawbreakers.
Because the fakes are as good as the real ones, and there's a market and there's a demand.
If you didn't have an art market, then fakers could not exist.
The concept that keeps this art world running is authenticity. The original painting is highly prized, because in painting, certainly, the beauty comes from seeing up close the hand of a skilled master, a human mythologized into legend, leaving behind only his mark for eternity. The name that we give to this demigod is the artist. You all know the stereotype. The lone genius who through sweat and honest toils to bring capital A, art, into the world. The man whose towering greatness is celebrated in song and verse and ought to have a final say about everything he ever created. Or, to quote Mel Brooks,
"You are the audience, I am the author, I outrank you!"
And yet there are these lowly beings who chip away at this tower of greatness to take a piece for themselves. Those greedy frauds, those art forgers, those idea thieves, those intellectual property pirates. This idea has not gone away, I should point out. I'm not going to deny Elmire was a criminal. He was essentially stealing clients from Picasso and others by copying their work. And if you've heard the figures shouted at art auctions, you know that could make someone a pretty penny. But let's ignore the money and look at him as an ideological criminal. He was stealing the idea of Picasso by creating false Picassos, therefore sullying the name of Picasso. But... Quick! Who wrote Little Red Riding Hood? Who wove the Bayeux Tapestry? Who built Stonehenge? Who wrote the melody to 99 bottles of beer on the wall? Who made the first lolcat? You're right. Nobody knows. Towards the end of the movie, Wells has one of the most profound monologues I've ever heard, all while looking at a Gothic cathedral with no named architect.
You know, it might be just this one anonymous glory. Of all things, this rich stone forest, this epic chant, this gaiety, this grand choiring shout of affirmation, which we choose, when all our cities are dust, to stand intact, to mark where we have been.
Wells makes the argument that after all the hullabaloo over who did what and why, all you're left with is the art. When the names of the creators have gone, all that's left is a beautiful expression of humanity. If that's true, then why do we even care about the author? Well, just as an example, let's look at a modern, popular author. Okay, let me get a totally random book off the shelf, which is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, which is a totally random book that I totally picked at random. I like this book quite a lot. The Fault in Our Stars is a very popular book, and John Green is a very popular author. If you've read this particular book, you may be a fan of the Greens, and you may know all about his friendship with Esther Earle, to whom the book is dedicated, and his work online as a vlogger and an educator, and the Daily Mail's condescending label of Sicklet, and Pizza John, and puppy-sized elephants, and Unless You Are the Mongols, and this hand gesture. All of that may come to mind when you hear the name John Green. Now, John Green is a real person who eats and sweats and farts and gets pimples like other real people. Ask any competent medical professional today, and they will tell you that John Green is a living human being. But if you were to ask French philosopher Roland Barthes, John Green is dead, because John Green is not alive. John Green is an author. Also, Barthes is actually dead, so forgive me for conjuring the weird image of a French zombie telling a living person that he is the real dead one. Consider this a belated Halloween episode. Anyway, the death of the author, the widely influential 1967 essay by Barthes, argued that art was not this grand pillar of authorial intent made for you to decode. Instead, art was made up of a tissue of signs, a series of signifiers to other cultural constructs that exist independently of any author, and so attempting to glean the motives of a great and powerful author is pointless. But while Barthes was calling the time of death on the author, Michel Foucault said that the author was never alive. In his 1969 essay, What is an Author?, Foucault described the author as an ideological construct, a name which serves to characterize a certain mode of discourse. This book was written by John Green, the author of The Fault in Our Stars. Because John Green said this in The Fault in Our Stars, I want to make a wordy Tumblr post about it. Foucault called this position the author function. That is, the discourse made possible by the author, John Green. So for Foucault, there would actually be two John Greens. There's the real John Green, who's a human being who bleeds and talks fast and loves his family and scratches his ass in the morning and does this ridiculous dance. But there's also the author John Green, who's not made of flesh, but who's made of depression as a side effect of dying, and unlit cigarettes between your teeth, and some infinities are bigger than other infinities, and falling in love the same way you fall asleep, slowly and then all at once, and pain that demands to be felt, and okay. Every signifier that signifies the idea of John Green that can be used to discuss the works of John Green. And that author concept, John Green, would change significantly if the writer of The Fault in Our Stars was revealed to be, say, a juggalo, or a pseudonym for Hank Green, or 500 hamsters wearing a John Green suit. I just realized that the real John Green might stumble onto this and be very weirded out by all of it, but then again, who cares what he thinks? He's the Zodiac Killer. So, how does this apply to art forgery?
In this catalog was this Modigliani, which is a Modigliani by Elmire.
A Modigliani by Elmire. That's a weird sentence. But if it looks like a Modigliani, and an expert says that it looks like a Modigliani, and it quacks like a Modigliani, and the author function of Modigliani is simply a social construct applied to any sort of discourse, verbal or visual, that is made possible by the existence of Modigliani, then is it a Modigliani? Modigliani is very hard to say. Obviously Modigliani's lawyers would have something to say about whether or not it's Modigliani.
I don't feel bad for Modigliani, I feel good for me.
Now, surely the author has some say about the author function.
A friend, another friend, once showed a Picasso to Picasso, who said no, it was a fake. Pablo, said his friend, I watched you paint that with my own eyes. Said Picasso, I can paint false Picassos as well as anybody.
Now, Foucault described the author function as a limiting force, as a way of narrowing the discourse and halting potentially transgressive statements, to have the author own up to the discourse they create. In film, this is related to auteur theory, which is rather relevant to our lead character. Let's face it, Welles was, and still is, a celebrity. Yes, filmmakers have deified him, but to the populace at large, he's still the bloated, planet-eating, fish-stick-hawking culture snob with ambitions to screw over Zac Efron, pump Ed Wood, land Kermit the Frog his first contract, and of course, try to take over the world! But after his death, Welles became a cinematic Picasso. He became a towering artist figure in his own right. It's kind of a cliche to have a film snob come out and say that one of his favorite movies is Citizen Kane, but, It's ironic that Welles is so anti-author and anti-expert, considering that his legacy is built on experts declaring him to be a great auteur. As rightfully lauded as he is in critical circles, it's easy to forget that Welles came into movies as an amateur. He made big, bold splashes in theater and radio before being whisked away to Hollywood, where he surrounded himself with people more talented than himself and made himself a movie god. Basically, he directed movies the same way Charles Foster Kane ran newspapers.
I don't know how to run a newspaper, Mr. Fetch. I just try everything I can think of.
Roger Ebert argued that this in and of itself was a great talent. The ability to recognize and utilize the talents of others. Which, let's face it, is what a director does. It's not inaccurate to say Citizen Kane was Welles' film, but it also belongs to screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz, cinematographer Greg Toland, co-stars Joseph Cotton, Agnes Moorehead, Dorothy Comingore, editor Robert Wise, composer Bernard Herrmann, and everyone else who helped make it. But I can't deny that Welles has a certain auteur stamp, you know? I mean, they look really different, but both Citizen Kane and F for Fake are movies about how it's impossible to judge someone by the artifacts they leave behind. In a lot of ways, F for Fake diminishes the role of the artist as well as the expert. When Elmire paints a false Picasso, is he not simply expanding this constructed idea of Picasso? Isn't Irving adding to the already unreal legend of Howard Hughes? Maybe the capital A author and the artwork have nothing to do with each other. By the way, this was also a theme in The Fault in Our Stars. Isn't that right, douchepants? That man was the star of Antichrist. The sensation of the art doesn't mean it's in any way related to the author. That doesn't mean that we won't cross oceans to meet the author. But again, maybe we don't need an author.
The triumphs and the frauds, the treasures and the fakes, the fact of life. We're going to die. Be of good heart. Cry the dead artists out of the living past. Our songs will all be silenced. But what of it? Go on singing.
It's as if, in his last movie, he came to the opposite conclusion of his first movie. We'll always have Xanadu, so who cares about Rosebud? But that reading suggests that art is only this distant thing made by long-dead anonymous people, and that the discussion about the art is tangential to the art itself. Which is true, if only in that all art will become that. All art, if it survives the weathering of time, will become less like a Picasso, either real or fake, and more like the cathedral it shot. When it's created, there will be interest in its author and their foibles and their failings and their background and their inspirations, and basically the entire culture that the artwork was created in. But over time, all of that will fade, leaving just the artwork itself, just in a vacuum, alone outside of society. Or maybe not. Even though this cathedral has no author, we can still call it Gothic architecture, it's still a house of worship, an example of Catholic ideals, iconographic beauty. It still has meaning in society, meaning that we, as viewers, create. This is something that we automatically start doing, because when an artwork has no author, we start constructing that author. And they do that because, guess what? Art is not separate from people, it's an extension of them. It's people talking to people through other means. You look at art in order to look at people. As for the fakers, well, Welles comes out and says the most honest thing an artist can say to you. I am lying. All artwork is based on lies and charlatanism and half-truths and statements that you may or may not mean entirely. Everyone involved in this film, including Welles, including Reichenbach, including the lead fakers El Miodori and Clifford Irving, including co-writer Oria Kodar, including Howard Hughes, including Picasso, including every critic who praised this film over the decades and kept it alive in the hearts of cinephiles everywhere, including me, is a faker. Fakers all participating in the creation of, let's call it truth.
Truth, I'm afraid the pompous word for that is art.
All else, the charlatans and the frauds, maybe their biggest crime is making you feel something. After all, art isn't made for the artist. It's made for the viewer. And the author, well, what's an author but the entity that gave you that feeling?
You've seen my big Cézanne at the Metropolitan? Is that just a forgery, my friend? Is it not also a painting?
So keep that in mind when watching this movie. Or any movie, really. Anything, really. I'm Kyle, I think. Signing off.